Translation, a weekly-ish exploration of one fellow's translation of Christian scriptures, one chapter, more or less, at a time. I'm Brandon Rhodes, and across the internet from me is the translator himself, Brandon Johnson. Hey, Brandon.
Hey, Brandon.
Good to see you this fine, if rainy morning.
Very wet outside, yes.
Yes, it is. We've got only half a chapter to talk about today with everybody. We're going to be talking about the first half of Hebrews chapter 12. We thought we were going to get this in one episode, and then once we started verbally processing through it, it was like, you know what, let's divvy this up a little bit. So I'm looking forward to it. I wasn't expecting some of these themes to be so resonant. Seems to be a constant pattern for me on this show, as I'm like, oh, and then we hit record after I'm done making that dreadful noise into a microphone.
That's right.
So we're going to just go through Romans 12, 1 through 13. So
Hebrews?
if you haven't... Hebrews, thank
12?
you. Jeez, what? We had to record 4 different efforts in me getting through the beginning of this episode. So it's too late now. We're doing it live.
That's right.
So,
Hebrews 12.
Hebrews 12, 1 through 13. This comes after, the big rehearsal of the lineage of the faithful who have come before us, how it relates to the faithfulness of Christ. And it's really, Priscilla is bringing this whole thing to a crescendo here. But doing so, getting into a metaphor that hasn't really been explored much in this letter. And that is one of parenting, or conventional translations seem to emphasize a bit more discipline, or particularly carceral or punitive sense of that. So that's what we're going to be exploring today. It does seem like it's important for us to show you where this is going. I think it's going to be illustrative of a lot of the distinctions that we're going to be making today. And so just to jump to the start of next week's episode, looking at verse 14, can you read that for us?
Yeah. So 14 is, pursue peace among everyone, the sacred purpose for which you are designated, without which no one will see the Lord.
Thank you. Yeah, so that we're going to spend a lot of time next week really exploring the implications of the sense in which holiness is pursuing peace with everyone as far as you are able to, overcoming these dividing lines, past injustice, and finding a new kind of peace, belonging, and unity. And that is the work of holiness. Contra notions of holiness that seem to be more about not breaking rules. Pretty different.
Yeah.
Pretty different. In ethics, we were taught this could be called a distinction between deontological rules and teleological ethics. The end, which was are we talking about the end justifying the means? No, we're not really. We're really talking about what's the center of our imagination for what makes for the good life in Christ.
Yeah, that makes me think of my ethics class in my master's program, and I just actually attended an ethics workshop this weekend. In the class, we talked about the difference between mandatory ethics and aspirational ethics. So mandatory being that minimum line, do not cross this boundary. Like, as a therapist, don't have sex with your client. A pretty
Frowned upon.
hard line there. Yeah. Versus, so the mandatory ethics are not bad, but they're limited. So the aspirational ethics are more like, what is the best way for me to respond in this situation for the good of my client?
Mm.
Um, which would include not having sex with them. Uh, but it's certainly not just a list of like, don't do this, make sure you do this. Like, it's bigger than that.
Yeah.
And the quote ish, I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't have it in front of me from the workshop this weekend that I attended was the question of ethics is not what is the right thing to do. It's what is the wise and loving thing to do. So, like,
Ooh. Oh.
again, not what is the one correct option versus all the incorrect options, but how can I explore what's going to promote wisdom and loving, toward love toward my clients and
Yeah.
toward myself. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's good. When I learned how to drive, uh, they said don't look at the lines on the road. Look at the 10 seconds down the road of where you're going, and you
Hmm.
won't hit the lines,
Hmm.
probably. And I think
Yes.
that is very close to what we're getting at here.
Hmm.
Like, keep your eyes on the road, not on the lines. Keep your eyes on Christ, not on
Which
those.
it
There are
literally
clear
says.
parameters
Yeah.
exist.
Yeah.
Like they do.
Mm,
Rules can be a very helpful tool, but they are not the purpose. They're not the end. They're not the destination.
right.
They're the rumble strips.
Yeah. 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 Which we'll come back to that idea of let us fix our eyes on Jesus in a moment. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, thinking of you're wanting to look ahead to that for 14, like that pursuing peace with everyone, that's the calling. That's what holiness is. I think looking back to the beginning of Hebrews, in these last days, God has spoken through a son. Um, yeah, looking at Jesus's example, like if anything, he was breaking rules. Like anytime there's a rule to be addressed in what Jesus is doing, he's breaking them um, for the sake of doing the wise and loving thing.
Yeah.
Um, and connecting to the child rearing, parenting, discipline thing, going back to chapter 6, that connects with both the pursuing peace and what it was talking about. Uh, you should be eating solid food by now, but you still need the milk. Like it's helping
Mm-hmm.
you grow up, right? And the we were as we looked at it, we realized, oh yeah, things like baptism and laying on of hands, even resurrection is seen as the solid food, like the stuff that you need to be mature enough to wrestle with. And if you don't already have the foundational stuff like peace and loving support for each other,
Yes.
which is what it's talking about there, first, that stuff is not only irrelevant, it's harmful. If you give a 4-month old sandwich, that's going to be very bad for them. You got to give them what they're ready for, which is just the milk still. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
until they're mature enough to handle what comes next.
Hmm. Yep. So what comes next here is
Well,
reading some of the text.
yeah, let's pull
um,
it up here.
mhm.
Okay.
So First one I want to dive into here is verse 2. There's a phrase there, um, focusing on Jesus, the one who begins and completes faithfulness.
Mhm,
Now, that's an often quoted passage in the church. Who completes faithfulness, who endured the cross and disregarded its shame in exchange for the joy laid out for him, and he has sat at the right hand of the throne of God. Very popular, moving passage, but the way it's often translated is the author and perfecter of our faith. You went with the one who begins
right.
and completes faithfulness. Can you give me some elaboration on that?
Mhm. Yeah. So perfecter is not like one who makes it flawless. Um, it's like anytime you see perfect or making perfect in scripture, it's not talking about making flawless. It's talking about bringing it to completion,
Mm,
finishing the job.
hmm.
Um, in fact, perfect, I think, used to be a good English word for it. It's not how we use perfect anymore. We use it like flawless
Hmm. Yes, we do.
uh, now. And so that's really just not the right word to use anymore. So something like bringing to maturity, bringing to completion, uh, along those lines is much more appropriate.
Hmm.
And same with author. It's like it doesn't really have anything to do with writing, which is the only context I ever use the word author.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's yeah, the producer, the one who begins things. So it's really talking about the bookends, kind of like alpha and omega concept here. Like
Hmm.
he's the beginner and the completer. It's the and looking at the previous chapter, the final verse there is that they would not be made complete without us. Like Jesus starts the faithfulness that leads to more faithfulness and completes it through us.
Yeah, yeah. Faithfulness becomes almost this mystical layer of reality that is not that far from when you hear some people talk about a Christ consciousness. Um,
Mm,
there's the sense in which all of these saints that have come before us, um, like we talked about last episode, it's not it's not blind faith that they all had. It's a fidelity to a hope and to the
mhm,
reality of God, of this particular revelation of God. But it seems to be like a faithfulness that is both Christ participating in them, the divine, and they are participating. Like it's both ways. It's like this sort of
mhm,
pre-incarnational kind of thing. And so, yeah, from start to finish here, who begins and completes faithfulness. Doesn't begin
mhm.
and complete our blind faith,
Right. The word
but
hour is not in the Greek, by the way.
oh, okay. Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
completes faithfulness. Like
Mhm,
Christ is that resonance field of full humanization, which is divinization. If that makes sense to anybody, I'm so happy.
mhm. Theosis, perhaps.
Theosis, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
divinization, theosis, these are the words used to describe um, salvation in the early, as understood by most strains of the early church and carried on by
Mhm.
um, parts of the West, but definitely in the East. Um,
Yeah. That sense of taking on the nature of God, like it
yeah,
talks about in First Peter.
yeah, which is Christ likeness.
Right.
It doesn't mean becoming an all powerful Zeus.
No.
It means
Yeah.
just
Yeah. the main characteristic of God in the Bible is not all powerfulness. It's it's not true, but it's not focus like it is in Western Christianity.
Yeah, and the power that's being used there or conceived of there is often domination
Right.
and
And
control.
it's which is not how the Bible talks about it.
No, the power of
Uh,
God is revealed in the cross. The power of God, you know,
as we see here in
right
verse 2,
there.
he
Yeah.
endured the cross and disregarded its shame in exchange for the joy laid out for him,
Yes.
which is somehow connected with he sat at the right hand of the throne of God. It's like, oh, being at the right hand of the throne of God is conquering, dominating. No,
No.
it's enduring the cross and shame.
It's loving solidarity. It's with like the I'll give you a truer word for God than all powerful. With.
Mhm.
That's the fundam like a fundamental because a deeper still is love, and out of love comes with.
Right.
So I that was a meandering exploration of this shift
Hmm.
here, but it really does your translation shift from completing our faith to faithfulness is more harmonious with this I would say more ancient notion of what Christ meant.
Mm.
And certainly more than like blind faith is the way to make yourself no longer a rule breaker but a rule follower,
Right.
which is the contrast I think we need to be setting up here for the next series of translations, which is getting into
Right.
parenting and discipline and all that. So what's the next one we want to
Yeah. We're looking at verse 5. Scroll this down here on the screen. Um, looking at the word where I have child rearing.
mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, can you want to
yeah,
just read
my,
maybe 5 through 8 or 4 through 8? I don't know.
yeah. Um, in your struggle, you haven't yet mounted a resistance against deviation to the point of blood, which, by the way, is like receiving persecution, not doling it out. Uh,
Hmm.
uh, you have neglected to remember the encouragement which is discussed for you as sons. My son, don't minimize the Lord's child rearing, and don't become exhausted when being challenged by him. You see, the Lord trains up whomever he loves and corrects every son he receives. Endure, endure during child rearing. God is treating you as sons. What son does a father not train up? But if you don't experience the child rearing of which all have become participants, then you are counterfeits and not sons.
Hmm. Word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
So we've got a few phrases here from discipline versus child rearing or
Hmm.
chastises versus corrects. Um,
Yeah. Trains up versus disciplines. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Let's start off with. You want to start with the first one there? Discipline, child rearing.
Yeah. So there in verse 5, uh, don't minimize the Lord's child rearing. That's typically discipline. Don't disregard or ignore or whatever the Lord's discipline. And typically that's understood to mean like punishment. Um, but the word is idea, like from the word for child. So it's like the most really weirdly literal way to translate that would be childing. Uh, so childrearing
Yeah.
is how we do that in English. So it absolutely does not inherently imply punishment. It
Unless your vision of
means
raising children is fundamentally one of slapping their hand for breaking your rules.
right. But think chapter 6. We're talking about helping them grow from when the time when they need milk to when they are ready for solid food. It isn't about bad behavior. Like even at 3 years old, a child, even who can repeat back to you what the rules are, their brain has not developed enough impulse control for them to follow through on it. It's not physically possible
Yeah.
for a 3-year-old not to break rules. So
Yep.
the appropriate response is not punishing, hurting, being violent. It's protecting, nurturing, redirecting, continuing the training and the guiding
Yeah.
so that they're prepared. They know them well and thoroughly as they get older to respond on their own.
Hmm.
Similarly, in verse 6, the word that I have is train up. Uh, it's just a different form. That was the noun. This is the verb of the same childing, a child, to child rear, train up, guide into growing.
Yeah.
Um, and traditionally disciplines, which is a fine word if you understand disciplining as nurturing and guiding and training, teaching. Uh, it's from the same English root as disciple. Being a
Oh my.
disciple isn't being someone that gets punished, it's someone who's being taught and trained.
Hmm.
Um, but somehow we have turned that into punishment and violence.
Yeah. If our paradigm for God and humanity and the basic story that going on here is one of rule following versus rule breaking, and we are now objects for redemptive violence, for punishment, and not just in hell or something like that, but um, your suffering is because you did something wrong. Now, there is something true to the sense in which the wrath of God is leaving us to the consequences of our own idolatries. Um,
Mhm.
that is much more true than some notion of hell. But it's often
Yes.
used that notion that like,
And
oh,
it's
you're
directed
having,
towards those who cause harm, especially those who systemically and systematically, those are two different words, uh, cause harm consistently. That's the focus of where the anger shows up.
yeah, yeah, like those who live by the sword die by the sword.
Mm.
That's the wrath of God. Um, the 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 wealthy will die alone and lonely or be slaughtered by a peasant revolt. That's closer
Mhm.
to the wrath of God. Um, the fact that you have
Mhm.
hardship in your life, you are being oppressed. That's not God's chastening, punishing, disciplining, raising you. That is injustice. Let us not gaslight the oppressed,
Mhm.
excluded, and left out, left behind, and let down.
Yeah. And we'll get to later in the chapter this a, a change in the words that with that understanding makes more sense of it. You know, teaser, it has to do with the word grief.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, causing grief in order to punish bad behavior, not the character of God.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh, but grief and discipline are certainly connected.
yeah. So I think this pattern of translations around what does it mean to raise children and
Hmm.
what does it mean to be parented by God, child reared by the Holy One. Um, it seems to like kind of go both ways. Like which came first? Our warped notions of how to parent and then projecting that on God, or hearing these conventional translations and saying, therefore, I must use punitive I have to have a punishment paradigm for my child
Yeah,
because that's how
I tend to
God
think
is.
it's and I think it's the first one, like, you like, noticing that discipline and disciple are from the same English root. It
Yeah,
feels like at some point in the past, somebody somewhere understood in this they were translating this stuff into English, that it was about teaching.
yes,
Um, and we have just gotten so used to thinking of how we raise children is by being violent toward them when they break the rules,
yeah,
that, like, that must be what God's discipline is too.
hmm yeah, yeah. So it's this feedback loop
Mhm.
that perpetuates um, a punishment paradigm for raising children and for relating to God,
Just so
and on
harmful.
it
Yeah.
goes.
Mhm.
So, yeah, met so many folks over the years for whom um, they had to really get out of the faith entirely to get out of that notion of what it is to be, um, yeah, like their parents were abusive and they thought that was glorifying God.
Mhm.
Um, it's pretty messed up.
It is.
And I am sorry to all those for whom that is part of their legacy and the stigmata that they bear. Um, may this translation be a
Yeah.
invitation to a um, holier God.
Yeah.
um, yeah, let's continue on.
Yeah. Well, continuing on uncomfortably brings to me
Yeah,
to
this is going to get even
6,
more
where
uncomfortable.
I where I have the word corrects.
Hmm.
The
In verse
word
6.
is in verse 6. Uh, Other translations have chastises or punishes or even scourges, uh, which think Jesus before the cross, where he was lashed 39 times. That's a scourging.
Yeah,
Um, and the most literal translation of the word scourge is actually probably the best. Um, it literally means to whip is the verb. So with everything we've been talking about how discipline and child rearing are about nurturing and guiding, training, and not punishing and not doing violence. It's like record scratch here. Like, wait, didn't we just say this isn't about
right. And here
violence?
we have you see the Lord trains up whomever he loves and whips every son he receives. Yeah, we didn't go. You didn't go with whips,
Yeah,
but that's like kind of the
right.
implication of the other translations.
Yeah, and even more gaslighty, like receives,
Yeah,
depending on whether you're looking back to the scripture quotation that's happening there as from the Hebrew Bible or from the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, the Septuagint, which this is actually referencing that one, the Greek translation. So it just means like welcomes or receives in the Greek.
Yeah.
In the Hebrew, it's actually like delights in.
Mm.
So it's like starts to get in like, I'm doing this because I'm loving you. I love you so much. Bring me such joy. I'm going to whip you over and over and over. It's like, wait, what is going on here?
Yeah, an abuser saying, "I'm doing this because I love you."
Yeah. So I don't know for there's not like a definitive way to like suddenly make this feel better. Um,
Yeah.
but what I can say is that if you have read this whole context as punishment, then this makes perfect sense to take it very literally. If, which I think is much more faithful, like to the Greek, to the words here, it's not about punishment and it's about guiding and training, then this becomes metaphorical. And so the word is used for like punishing prisoners or like training animals like horses. Now you're not
Mhm.
whipping a horse, which I don't love the idea of whipping horses at all. But when you do, it's not to punish them; it's teaching and training, getting them to know what to do.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Uh, in English, we have this phrase, "whip into shape,"
mhm,
and that,
which has to do with like training,
yeah,
like exercise, even like yeah.
and
Which there's a
and
bit
that
of
it will,
suffering involved in exercise. So,
yeah, at least pain or discomfort or challenge.
yeah, discomfort. Yeah.
Yeah, suffering has a deeper sense of angst and all that.
Mhm.
Like it broadly means a focus and at some level demanding, maybe even painful path of growth, getting on board with the project. Um, and that's what we mean by whipping into shape. Like
Mhm.
we could put in your translation here, you see the Lord trains up whomever he loves and whips into shape. Yeah, I wouldn't want the word whip in there because how easily our
Mm.
preconceived biases are of a abusive parent or an abusive God. Like it's so
Yeah.
easy for these metaphors to just get carried away and assault us.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even training might be the best word there if we're thinking like training a horse.
Oh, I like that.
Um, but the phrase right before it is already trains, so
Oh
whatever.
yeah,
But it's a Hebrew poetic parallelism. So trains up
yeah,
and corrects or parallel. They're supposed to mean the same thing. They're synonyms.
yeah.
That's
Course,
how that
like
works.
a course correction redirects,
Hmm.
gets you on the path. If we're going with the horse angle, so
Right.
broadly, yes, you could translate this in a way that is expressive of the toxic abuser God paradigm.
Hmm.
And you can just as plausibly translate it in a more um, holy. I'm gonna keep using that word
Hmm.
out of 14 um, way. So it's really a question of like they are both factually true, or like they are possible translations, but the question before
Multiple
us,
translations of the word,
yeah,
but is it faithful to the context?
but
Yeah.
is it faithful? Is it faithful to the context and to the God that we know in
Hmm.
Jesus,
Yeah.
and to the God whom
Which.
Jesus knew as called Father,
Hmm.
called Abba? So
Yep.
yeah, this isn't a proof text for spanking.
It's certainly not whipping.
Certainly not whipping. Yeah,
Yeah.
don't get the switch. Um, should we jump to verse 10
Yeah.
ish?
Hmm. Yes, it says, "You see, while the first ones being parents, like our biological parents,
Hmm.
you see, while the first ones trained us up for a little while as seemed good to them, the other one, the Father, the Heavenly Father, uh, the other one does so to unify us for sharing his designation for sacred purposes."
Hmm.
So most of the translations have something like, um, does so, the Father does so to, or for our good or for our benefit,
Yeah.
um, which is a little weird. It's not the Greek that would normally be translated that way. There is a sense of contributing or helping that could be in the word, so I can see how they got there. It's not terrible. Um, but the primary meaning of the word is a sense of bringing together, um,
Mm.
and also the helping meaning of it uh, is listed in the lexicons as only being the definition when it's used in a different grammatical structure than it appears here. So it really doesn't fit the
Yeah.
context. So both the more literal translation of it and what fits in this grammatical structure is more about bringing it together or unifying. So that's why I have that here. And that fits with what we were talking about in chapter 6. And it fits what we're looking forward to in verse 14 of this chapter, that
You
bring
got it.
peace among people.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, creating
so,
a new holy belonging across alienations, divisions, and oppressions, and grudges. Like that is the work of, like, it's God looking at the path, looking at the road, not the rumble strip, right? The
mhm,
path is a humanity flourishing peaceably and letting differences not become divisions, but the bounteous diversity of this magical creation that we get to live in. Um,
mhm,
that is our designation for sacred purposes,
mhm.
not don't break the rules.
Right.
That's to be on the road,
Yeah.
not on the rumble strip.
Right. Yeah. And again, designated for sacred purposes is how I've been translating holiness, because that's what it means. Like, again, we've mentioned this before, but the way I heard it defined growing up was set apart. Again, not wrong, but not separated as in set apart, but as in designated for particular use. Like the wine glasses are set apart from the tumblers because they're
That's good.
for drinking wine specifically, and they're just not generic glasses. But they're not better. They're just for a specific purpose.
Yeah, be a chalice, y'all.
Mhm.
Yeah, I love this. There's nothing problematic or harmful about the conventional translation here, but when you find unify us, it really does deepen the flow of argument and invitation that Priscilla is giving us,
Mhm.
which is fantastic.
It also is pointing out, like, the purpose of this sentence is to say why the training is happening, and if it's just like for your good, it's like, okay, what does that mean? It still like doesn't really tell you anything.
Yeah,
But she's actually trying to say something here.
yeah, absolutely. So let's move on to verse 11 here. I wasn't expecting
Yeah,
this, but I love it.
yeah. While to whoever passes by, all child rearing seems to be not prompted by joy but by grief. Later, to the ones trained up by it, it pays back the peaceable fruit of justness. There's a lot in there.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's a little bit awkward wording. I wonder if I could clean that up a bit. But um, this is what I mentioned earlier when I was talking, mentioned like teaser, there's something coming up about grief. Um, it's important. So this is where I was saying like child rearing seems to be prompted by grief
Yeah.
versus more traditionally discipline seems
Yeah.
painful.
Mm,
And I can see with how they've been traditional translations have been going through this chapter so far, like that makes sense. But literally, it it's that the childing seems to be of grief or
mm,
of sorrow is the most literal way to translate that, which then leads you to go, what does it mean to be of grief? And it's really just up to interpretation. So whoever's doing the translation has to kind of figure out that based on the context.
hmm.
And so with the context that other translations have, having say that the punishment is painful makes sense.
Yep.
But I don't think that's what it's talking about.
Yeah.
So being of grief means it's coming out of grief, coming from grief. It's being prompted by the grief. So since there hasn't been unity before this, people have been in competition with each other, trying to get my needs met over and against your needs being met, keep me secure and being in by making sure you're out, all of that stuff. That is what is trying to be corrected by providing the milk. Um, yeah, that kind of suffering needs a response of training how to fix that, how to make that better, how to create unity so that we're taking care of each other. That's the purpose, the sacred purpose that we're designated for.
Hmm.
So yeah, in order to get us to live into that sacred purpose, yeah, there's some training and guiding that needs to happen because this clearly this there's suffering and grief happening. That means that we're not there yet. I think that's what it's saying here. There's not joy yet. There's grief instead. So we need to do something about that.
Yeah. I mean, just a few verses earlier, for the joy set before him,
Mhm,
it's ahead of him right now. It hurts. It's hard. Um,
mhm,
we'll get wisps of the joy, and uh, grief is a necessary companion to our formation because it is fundamental to the human experience, not because pain is sacred. To be human is
mhm,
sacred, and grief emerges out of it's an expression of love, among other things.
mhm,
There's that line from WandaVision. Um, what is grief but love enduring?
mhm,
And so to be parented and participate in the child rearing of God is in part grounded in a sense of love feeling like grief. Um,
mhm,
to feel a pathos, like it's a heart knowing of injustice or alienation. Um, if you want to use the language of rule breaking, it can even be there. Like there's this sense of like, this is not how it should be. Human kids
mm,
should behave better. And so there's a kind of parenting
should
where
be.
you're like, I'm just trying to help them figure out how to play nice.
Hmm.
and the and the divine is trying to help us figure out how to play nice.
Hmm. Yeah, which is a really good segue into the next half of this verse.
Hmm.
But later, those who have been trained up by this childrearing, for them, it is back peaceable fruit of justness.
Mm,
Like the the result of that child rearing, of being trained up by it, even when it's in response to grief, even when it involves suffering, as the opportunity for being trained. Uh, it's creating results. That's the fruit that are promoting peace among people and being the kind of people who promote justice. So having the character of justness, being just, a just people.
yes.
Um, and being a just people means one that everybody is taken care of. There's jubilee. It's that
Yeah.
sense of all needs are being met because we're working together for the good of all of us.
Yeah. Which neuters the locus of so much violence in this world is scarcity. Yeah. No justice, no peace, right? The
Mhm.
two birth one
Go
another.
together. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And that's where this whole thing is going. It's not God's
Hmm.
project is not to create little pink primates, multicolored primates rather, uh, like us who don't break his rules. God is creating little primates who reflect that inner life of God of justice, peace, harmony, abundance, and drawing from the imagination and memory of Israel, jubilee in this world. God is looking for a body. God is looking for partners. God is looking for family, not like rule followers. The
Hmm.
rules are only going to get you so far. It's kind of one of the founding ideas in this whole sacred story is they're a part of it. They're not a bad part of it, but you can be bad about it with them. Because the
Hmm.
goal is shalom and justice.
Right.
To be
Which is
obedient
just
to our love and
continued.
longing, not to our rules outside of us.
Right. Right.
And that
Yeah.
brings us, I
Pursuing
suppose,
the wise and loving way.
yeah, absolutely. Wise and loving. I love it.
Yeah. Which don't have to say a lot about the last couple of verses in this paragraph here, but just how much of a record scratch it is
Yeah.
in the more traditional rendering of first couple of paragraphs. But it make perfect sense in this flow of like, because of this, what are we doing? We're supporting the hands that have gone limp from suffering and oppression and burden, and the knees that are like on limp, like
Like the hands and knees
these,
of one on a cross.
yeah, or a people being oppressed
Yeah.
who are exhausted because of working all day, barely make ends meet to like maybe not even have enough to eat, right? Like I don't know, make level paths for your feet, make things easier for people so that what is limping wouldn't be sprained, and even better, would be healed. So it's like supporting those who are suffering, create healing in the community. Like that is what it means. Unify, be just, to be peaceable, to live out the sacred purposes for which we have designated.
Hmm. And so when you find yourself struggling with the challenge of participating in the faithfulness of Christ, in a lot of ways, this episode is Priscilla voicing God's response of course. Of course. There's no other way.
Hmm.
This life is hard, and this way of making it more gentle is still hard. Of course.
Hmm. Hmm.
His yoke is easy and burden light, and not without um, growing pains.
Hmm. And even that verse is about like a young ox being paired with the stronger ox on the yoke. The stronger ox pulls most of the weight. The younger ox is still pulling a weight.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
that's good. That's good. Well, this has been a fun setup to, next week's episode is one that we've been looking forward to since we first began talking about what we want to explore in Hebrews. So I love how much we got to explore it ahead of time here. Um,
Hmm.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this leg of the journey. As always, we are thankful for you. The easiest way to support Found in Translation is to leave us a rating or a review in your podcast player or YouTube or Facebook, wherever you're finding us. It makes it easier for more people to find the show. Seriously, it really does. Make these algorithms work for good conversations, not bad. The second best way to support the show is to become a sponsor. You can do that for just $5 a month. When you do that, you get comment access on the Translations Google Doc and the satisfaction that you are supporting exceptionally nerdy independent media. You can find the link to join the community in the show notes. The music you're listening to is by Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com. Found in Translation was produced by Perry FM on unceded Chinook and Kalapuya land. Bye, Brandon.
Hi, Brandon.
Bye, everybody.